Well, welcome to number 5, part 5 of exploring the challenges of modern secularism or secular humanism. We will be following up on what we looked at last time, and that was looking through the history of the relationship between Christianity and the founding of the United States. And we saw where it was expected by the founding fathers that there would be a religious dimension in the sense of Christianity would have to be part of the full moral foundation for this nation to be successful. But we've seen since 1947 with the Everson versus Board of Education case that Christian values and Christian expression is being pushed out of the public sphere. And so we were looking at that last week, and now we're going to move on with some more of that. But then we're going to move into looking at some sociocultural factors that also play into moving thinking in the U.S. towards a more secular perspective. So let me share the screen with you, and we shall get started. All right. Well, the last case we looked at was Ingalls versus Vitale, and that's where a simple prayer could not be said in school. Well, in 1985, the case Wallace v. Joffrey was a case that originated in Alabama. The public schools there decided that, well, if they couldn't have a simple prayer, they'd have a period of silence at the beginning of the school day, and students could use that however they wanted. They didn't have to participate, but they'd have the silence be there, and they could think about whatever they wanted. But this also was a case. Came to the conclusion, the judges said, no, you couldn't possibly, you can't do that either, because it could possibly be used for a time of prayer. And so, I don't know how judges would ever know a person's state of mind, but Justice White and other justices had dissenting opinions on this, and they showed various precedents for it. And I've put a link here that is where you can go to read these things. So again, it's a continuing pushing through the court cases, the pushing out of any possibility of religious expression. Well, we're moving now we're in the 21st century now, and this year, 2022, is when I'm recording this particular one, in November of 2022. And just this last few months, you had some interesting Supreme Court rulings, like Kennedy v. Bremerton School District. This was a case that came up because a coach after a ball game would kneel down and pray, and sometimes players and others would join him, and he was told that no, this was not legal, and that he would have to quit doing it. And so it became a matter of protection of his freedom of speech and his freedom of expression of religion. And so you have Congress shall make no law respecting the standard of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, which, according to the First Amendment, Coach Kennedy's legal team argued that the coach's expression fell within the bounds of speech protected by the First Amendment. So that was the coach's legal team. So when the court decided, 6 of the 9 sitting U.S. Supreme Court justices agreed with them. And here's part of the opinion by the majority. The Constitution and the best of our traditions counsel mutual respect and tolerance, not censorship and suppression, for religious and non-religious views alike. This was Justice Neil Grosh writing for the majority. They go on and say, respect for religious expression is indispensable to life in a free and diverse republic. Whether these expressions take place in a sanctuary or on a field, and whether they manifest through the spoken word or a bowed head, here, a government entity sought to punish an individual for engaging in a brief, quiet, personal religious observance, doubly protected by the free exercise and free speech clause of the First Amendment. And the only meaningful justification the government offered for its reprisals rested on a mistaken view that it had a duty to ferret out and suppress a religious observances, even as it allows comparable secular speech. The Constitution neither mandates nor tolerates that kind of discrimination. Mr. Kennedy is entitled to summary judgment on his First Amendment claims. The judgment of the Court of Appeals is reversed. And so here you begin to see some changes where in one case, even taken out in time of silence is taken out. Now the Supreme Court is saying, no, this kind of expression is okay. And so it's a bit of a reversal, but not exactly the same. But again, we're seeing here that there is a little bit more flexibility showing up in what's being decided. Another case that's just happened is Carson v. Megan. This was concerned a Maine program to let rural residents who lived far from public schools attend private schools using taxpayers' dollars, but it was only so long as the school was non-sectarian, in other words, not religious. Families who wanted to send their children to Christian schools challenged the program, arguing that excluding religious schools violated their right to exercise their faith. And the court did side with them and saying the Maine program amounted to unconstitutional discrimination against religion. Now, you had an earlier case where it was the Supreme Court ruled that the taxpayer funds could not be used to reimburse parents who took their kids to private religious schools. So this seems to be a change in direction in the Supreme Court to some degree. And so interesting changes going on. And this, change along with the reversal of Roe v. Wade just indicates that there's a different thinking going on where it comes to the Supreme Court, and it may have an impact on going back to saying, well, what does the Constitution actually say, and what does it protect? And so this should be dropped into the thinking pool as you think about, Christian and biblical worldview and how it impacts the world we live in. All right, well, let's move on into the sociocultural factors that have precipitated more of a movement in our culture in the United States towards secular thinking. And there's a number of factors that go into that. And so we'll begin on this, but we'll be staying on this for a few lectures. But this will begin that section of it. So we had earlier talked about the developing of this split, particularly this is being in the Enlightenment period on. And we noted earlier the various sectors putting pressure on Christian perspective from its own secular perspective. And so you have the Christian worldview or biblical worldview and the secular worldview here. And this gap continues to grow. And there are some forces that are involved in this, and list three here. And we'll talk about some others as we go along. You got the secular humanist philosophy. This comes from your knowledge sector and reason. These are people that ideologically believe that there's only a physical realm and not a spiritual realm, and therefore everything revolves around humans, and humans is the center of everything. And find reason and science and so forth, they can make the world a better place and solve all the problems and all of those things. Um, but you have evolutionary theory and materialism, which has your science and reason brought together as well. And then modernization, wealth accumulation, technology, and media could be put in there. Sometimes I separate technology and media to popular media, saying, that it helps propagate things. So you'll see me split that off at times. There's a short video here by Oz Guinness, a wonderful speaker and writer on our cultural commentary on today from a Christian perspective. And so this short video, maybe I'll give you a little bit of a taste of the beginning of saying, some of the things that are faced in the idea of secularism.
We find ourselves in an extraordinary situation. Our Western world is in decline because we are a cut flower of civilization. And if you look at many of the important things in the West, high view of truth, high view of human dignity, high view of freedom or of equality, of justice, all of these need roots. And they've been cut off, and of course they are rooted in the scriptures, the Old and the New Testament, saying human dignity because we're made in the image of God, we're image bearers, and so on. So at a time of Western crisis, followers of Jesus, along with our Jewish friends, we are the champions, we are the defenders of these great truths which have made our civilization. Clearly, there are certain fields where we need leadership. In political leadership, the nation needs a Lincoln-like character. But you look at this is media, journalism, entertainment. Those are some of the culture-shaping, ideas-forming sectors of society, and we certainly need followers of Jesus in those areas. Instead of being on the back foot, and simply always thinking about stable things, we should be on the offensive and be proud and grateful to be the bearers of these great truths, which are at the heart of the gospel, which is the best news ever.
All right. One of the things to note is we call this a cut flower generation. In other words, the roots of the flowers that made this nation great have been cut off. And he's talking, of course, as you can see, about our Christian heritage for this nation, which the founding fathers had said was needed to make this a great experiment, that this new type of government that had never been tried before to work. But we're at the point now where things have secularized so much that we're cutting off those roots, and they're not even being recognized as having been there. We're not taught about, and then there's the whole movement of secularization that wants to forget the spiritual dimension and the spiritual roots that are necessary. And so it's just a little short clip out of a longer uh, presentation he's done in the past on that. But I think he's getting to the point, and he's saying we need people in all of these areas, Christians working with a biblical worldview in all of these areas to help make a difference and stop being on the defensive and get out there and mix it up with the world like we should, as Christ had wants us to. All right, well, oops, I didn't mean to do that exactly. We're going to watch another video. This one is talking about how the West came about to where it has, how it kind of outstripped others because of its what it was made up of and its foundation. So let's take a look at this, and we're going to look at a couple of videos, one right after another here, which give a perspective of how Western society was able to become kind of the dream place for everybody to come to, or to have something like that.
According to folklore, Mahatma Gandhi was once asked what he thought of Western civilization. He replied that he thought it would be a good idea. This was supposed to be a joke, but forgive me for taking the other side. I think Western civilization was and is a good idea. This is the nearest thing to heresy that exists in modern academic life. At most universities in the English-speaking world, there are demands to decolonize the curriculum. As a result, fewer and fewer students now graduate with any understanding of what has differentiated the West from the rest of the world. They leave with the misleading view that the defining features of Western civilization are slavery, imperialism, and war. No one would deny that after they began to expand overseas in the late 1400s, the peoples of Western Europe engaged in all of those things. But the point is that these were the least original things they did. Prior to that time, nearly all major civilizations enslaved people, built empires, and made war. In many of the places that Europeans went, South America, Africa, the Middle East, South Asia, and East Asia, they encountered empires. The West first surged ahead of the rest thanks to a series of institutional innovations that I call the killer applications. 1. Economic and political competition. After the fall of the Roman Empire, Europe was politically fragmented into multiple monarchies and republics. These in turn were internally divided into competing corporate entities, among them the ancestors of modern business corporations. The Medici Bank in Renaissance Florence is a good example. 2. The scientific revolution. All the major 17th century breakthroughs in mathematics, astronomy, physics, chemistry, and biology happened in Western Europe. The difference with earlier advances in science was the realization that through experiment and measurement, nature could not only be understood, but manipulated and even mastered. 3. The rule of law and representative government. An optimal system of social and political order emerged in the English-speaking world based on private property rights and the representation of property owners in elected legislatures. This was quite different from the systems of law that had evolved elsewhere, in which individual rights were given short shrift. 4. Modern medicine. Nearly all the major 19th and 20th century breakthroughs in healthcare were made by West Europeans and North Americans. Ironically, it was European researchers working in colonies who found cures for some of the most lethal tropical diseases, such as yellow fever. 5. The consumer society. The Industrial Revolution took place where there was both a supply of productivity-enhancing technologies and a demand for more, better, and cheaper goods. Without elastic demand for manufactured cloth, for example, there would have been little point in driving down its price. 6. The work ethic. Westerners worked longer, worked harder, and saved more of what they earned. This led to unprecedented capital accumulation, which in turn led to investment in the wonders of modern technology. For hundreds of years, these killer apps were essentially monopolized by West Europeans and their cousins who settled in North America and Australasia. They are the best explanation for what economic historians call the Great Divergence, the astonishing gap that arose between Western standards of living and those in the rest of the world. Yes, Western civilization did empire, it did war, it did slavery. But these weren't the things that led to the Great Divergence and the period of Western dominance of the world. It was the 6 killer applications that were crucial. And this Western bundle of institutions still seems to offer humanity the best hope of solving the problems we face in the 21st century. Maybe the biggest of these problems is not the rise of China, political Islam, or carbon dioxide emissions, but our own loss of faith in the civilization we inherited from our ancestors. Winston Churchill was no friend of Gandhi. In 1938, Churchill defined the central principle of Western civilization as the subordination of the ruling class to the people and to their will as expressed in a constitution. Maybe you know of another civilization that came up with that simple but uniquely powerful idea. I don't. I'm Neil Ferguson, Fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford for Prager University.
All right. Well, interesting. He looks at the sociocultural and economic background to the Western world and points out that despite the abuses that were common in the world in the early on in the 13th, 14th century and even before that, that what really distinguished the West was what he calls his killer apps there. And I think he's basically correct. What he doesn't talk about is that a lot of that came out of a Christian foundation and Christian perspective of, Christians, should work hard and, and a scientific method coming out of Christianity and, and a lot of scientific discoveries based on the fact that, the view was that God is intelligent and built an intelligent design and it can be explored because it's reasonable. So it's a very good one to see some of the things he talks about there. Now, another one going on here that we talk about is why has the West been so successful? And in this one, we'll see bringing in more of a religious aspect of it, because he looks at the fact that the current system, the American system, has been successful because it's rooted in two aspects: is the religious and yet the Greek philosophical thinking as well. And so let's take a look at this one.
Western civilization. It's been around for a while, but suddenly everybody is talking about it. Some are anxious to save it. Others are happy to see it go. But what exactly is Western civilization? Is it the great cathedrals of Europe or the Nazi concentration camps? Is it the freedoms secured in the US Constitution or chattel slavery? Life-saving medicines or poison gas? The left likes to focus on the bad: genocide, slavery, environmental destruction. But those have been present in every civilization from time immemorial. The positives are unique to the West: religious tolerance, abolition of slavery, universal human rights, the development of the scientific method. These are accomplishments of a scope and scale that only the West can claim. These aren't the only achievements that make the West special and uniquely successful. As Western thought evolved, it secured the rights of women and minorities, lifted billions of people out of poverty, and invented most of the modern world. Progress hasn't been a straight line, of course, but the arc of history is clear. The obvious proof is that the world is overwhelmingly Western. And, with few exceptions, those parts of the world that aren't aspire to be. Why? Why has Western civilization been so successful? There are many reasons, but the best place to start is with the teachings and philosophies that emerged from two ancient cities, Jerusalem and Athens. Jerusalem represents religious revelation as manifested in the Judeo-Christian tradition, the beliefs that a good God created an ordered universe and that this God demands moral behavior from his paramount creation, man. The other city, Athens, represents reason and logic as expressed by the great Greek thinkers, Plato and Aristotle, and many others. These two ways of thinking, revelation and reason, live in constant tension. Judeo-Christian religion posits that there are certain fundamental truths handed down to us by a transcendent being. We didn't invent these truths, we received them from God. The rules he lays down for us are vital for building a functioning moral civilization and for leading a happy life. Greek thinking posits that we only know truth by what we observe, test, and measure. It is not faith but fact that drives our understanding and exploration of the universe. Western civilization, and only Western civilization, has found a way to balance both religious belief and human reason. Here's how the balance works. The Judeo-Christian tradition teaches that God created an ordered universe and that we have an obligation to try to make the world better. This offers us purpose and suggests that history moves forward. Most pagan religions taught the opposite, that the universe is illogical and random, and that history is cyclical. History just endlessly repeats itself, in which case, why bother to innovate or create anything new? Second, Judeo-Christian tradition teaches that every human is created in the image of God. That is, each individual's life is infinitely valuable. This seems self-evident to us now, but only because we have lived with this belief for so long. The far more natural belief is that the strong should subjugate the weak, which is precisely what people did in nearly every society in all of history. Only by recognizing the divine in others did we ever move beyond this amoral thinking toward the concern for human rights, democracy, and free enterprise that characterize the West. But Judeo-Christian religion alone didn't build our modern civilization. We also required Greek reason to teach us objective observation, that man has the capacity to search beyond revelation for answers. Greek reason brought us the notion of the natural law, the idea that we could discover the natural purpose, the telos, of everything in creation by looking to its character. Human beings were created with the unique capacity to reason. Therefore, our telos was to reason. By investing reason with so much power, Greek thought became integral to the Western mission. Nowhere is this more perfectly expressed than in the American Revolution, in which the founding fathers took the best of the European Enlightenment with its roots in Greek thought and the best of Judeo-Christian practice with its roots in the Bible, and melded them into a whole new political philosophy. Without Judeo-Christian values, we fall into scientific materialism, the belief that physical matter is the only reality, and therefore also fall into nihilism, the belief that life has no meaning, that we are merely stellar dust in a cold universe. Without Greek reason, we fall into fanaticism, the belief that fundamentalist adherence to unprovable principles represents the only path toward meaning. The Soviet Union, Communist China, and other socialist tyrannies rejected faith and murdered 100 million people in the 20th century. Much of the modern Muslim world has embraced faith, but rejected reason. It's noteworthy that when the Muslim world did embrace Greek reason from the 8th to the 14th centuries, it was a leading center for scientific advancement. So again, we need both Jerusalem and Athens, revelation and reason. And yet many want to reject both. These people call themselves progressives. Ironically, they want to take us backwards to a time when man was governed neither by reason nor faith, but by feeling, and therefore back to a time of moral chaos and disorder, of feeling over fact. It would be a fatal mistake to follow the progressives. Stick with Athens and Jerusalem. I'm Ben Shapiro, editor of the Daily Wire and author of The Right Side of History for Prager University.
Okay. Well, I like how he brought together the idea of the two pillars, the reason and revelation there. And I think that's very accurate. And at least that is what the founding fathers were doing. And they weren't leaving out reason and had a high view, but they were humans that had been created by God and were unique and created in his image. And and they were created as reasoning beings, and God even said after creating them that he gave them custody and custodianship over the rest of the creation. And so that aspect exists in Scripture itself, that we are to use reason and the things God has given us to make this world a better place. And Christians, I think, on the whole, have done that historically, and they continue to be a moving force in making the world a better place. I've heard it said that Christians are so concerned about going to heaven and about the next world that they're not really concerned about the current world. And the truth of the matter is, it's not true. If you look at statistics and so forth, Christians are some of the most people that are involved and concerned about the current world, and they're spending trillions of dollars in helping humanity and dealing with tragedies and all kinds of natural disasters to helping the poor and the sick and so forth. Historically, that's been the case, and it continues to be so today. So, and the founding fathers, had the foresight to say, well, we need that spiritual dimension, and to build this country on. And so we don't want to forget that that was the point of all that. But socially and culturally, we need to realize that taking out the spiritual dimension is always a dangerous thing, as what happened with communist Russia and China. And as he pointed out, 100 million were killed. This is just a reminder that life becomes cheap when we don't maintain that spiritual dimension. And that's what humanist secularism does. Secular humanism is saying there is no spiritual realm, and that's where your moral absolutes are at. So, just a little bit of looking on at what we've looked at. First of all, remember that you had the Renaissance, and this was the beginning of humanistic thinking, which was basically Christian in content. And then you get the scientific revolutions, 16th, 17th centuries, Enlightenment period on into 18th century. Then you got industrialization, modern period, 19th, 20th centuries. Of course, now we're in the 21st century. And 19th, 20th century, one of the key writers, the philosopher, was Friedrich Nietzsche, who proclaimed God as dead. And you've probably heard that saying, indicating that by that he was indicating that Enlightenment thinking from his time period had killed God, in the sense that Western culture was now excluding him from public life. And so he was one of these that would take out, say, this pillar of spirituality shouldn't be there. But Nietzsche's philosophy was one of those philosophies that carried out by the Nazis, and we can see where that led with genocide and killing 6 million Jews, but a lot of other people too that didn't agree with them, or were a minority. And so, things can go really bad direction when you have that kind of thinking going on. All right, well then, when we look back at this time period, this crossroads there at the center, and part of this Enlightenment, also the Age of Reason, Thomas Paine, he was a very big critic of institutionalized Christianity, but he's an example of a humanist, and pushing more towards the secular side of things. He was certainly a deist, but beyond him, of course, you get to Darwin and his evolutionary theory and materialism. But even before Darwin, there was the idea that the world was moving from primitive to more complex, and moving, evolving to a higher plane and improving all the time. And so that, just remember, that kind of thinking was already present from the Enlightenment time. But Darwin, he gave it its scientific setting in his Origin of the Species, and which he gave he was able to give a secular perspective of the origin of the world and how it evolved to where it is. We don't even have time to talk about all the problems with the theory, but he was putting into biological terms and the philosophical commitment to the idea of the progressive humanity, and through evolution, that humanity evolves, and the strong survive, and so strong on top of strong, you improve. Well, we have the hindsight now to look back and say, well, after Darwin, how well has the world improved? I mean, you had World War I, then you had World War II, then you had everything from North Korean conflict to Vietnam War, and the Middle East situation and terrorism. And then if you look in specific countries, there's genocide going on off and on. This improvement aspect just doesn't seem to be happening. And, and a lot of the problems come from societies where that pillar of religious commitment is not strong or doesn't exist at all. And so we need to keep in mind that these continue to be an issue, that secularization is not really helping our situation. So as we think about the growth of secular humanism, and we had looked at humanism to some degree, and the term came out of Trark, was considered the father of humanism, a Christian guy, and he had it within a Christian framework, but that's going to start dissipating in the end of the 19th century and on into the 20th century. So we're going to take a little bit of a tour of that. So you have a Society of Ethical Culture, secular humanist philosophy, founded in 1876 by Rabbi Dr. Felix Adler. Other societies were formed and later merged with his to form what's called the American Ethical Union. And there's a link here. You can go online and read what these guys say and what they stand for. And so the American Ethical Union came to be in 1889. So this is one of the early ones. Became the center of what became what would become secular humanism, which secular humanism indicates that it's not with a religious framework. In fact, it throws out any kind of religious notion or spiritual notion of humanity. So it teaches that God does not exist and that man is perfectible, self-sufficient, and the measure of all things. And we'll see some of this more as we go through and look at some of these. And eventually we'll start looking at some particular statements that are made that show clearly what that perspective is. You have the First Humanist Society of New York, founded in 1929 by Charles Potter. He wrote Humanism, a New Religion. So, and this is something that's come up even now. There's a court case that the Supreme Court ruled that secular humanism can be called a religion. But before that, you can note his book title, Humanism, a New Religion. And so they look at it as competing with religious ideas. So he says education is thus the most powerful ally of humanism, and every American public school is a school of humanism. What can the theistic Sunday schools meeting for 1 hour once a week and teaching only a fraction of the children do to stem the tide of a 5-day program of humanistic teaching? One of the leaders in pushing this in schools was Horace Mann, and so realize that secular humanists have for a long time had the idea of really pressing this in to the public school system. In 1941, the American Humanist Society was founded by Curtis Reese and John Dietrich, and they were well-known Unitarian ministers and humanists. They ended up reorganizing Humanist Press Association of Chicago into the American Humanist Association. So here you have another humanist association. Well, this brings us to the Humanist Manifesto 1. And we will see there's a Humanist Manifesto 2 and a Humanist Manifesto 3. But this was the beginning of secular humanists stating outright their particular positions in these manifestos. And this one was signed by 34 prominent national figures, including John Dewey, so one that's very recognizable probably to a lot of people. It rejects traditional Christian beliefs, supports naturalism, materialism, rationalism, and in this case, socialism, which was very popular back then. The importance of this document, as Raymond Braggs, who is pro this position, has said that the importance of the document is that more than 30 men have come to general agreement on matters of final concern, and that these men are undoubtedly representative of a large number who are forging a new philosophy out of the materials of the modern world. And so he calls it a new philosophy. The other guy was saying, you know, a new religion. Even to this day, there's a debate among secular humanists. Should we allow ourselves to be called a religion or not? And they don't agree with each other on that. But interesting enough, some evangelical theologians tend to promote the idea that secular humanism is a religion. Well, by our definition that we started this course with, it wouldn't class itself as a religion because it doesn't believe in the ultimate. But because Supreme Court said it could be called a religion because it's sort of like Theravada Buddhism or Taoism, but in reality, those do have an area of ultimate concern and something transcendent to trying to accomplish. That would not be the case with secular humanism, at least in my perspective now. I can be wrong, but on the other hand, by our definition for religion in this course, as you know, looking to something transcendent, it doesn't qualify really as a religion. All right. Well, we're going to cut it off here, this video off here. And when we come back next time in the next video, we'll start looking at modernity, modernization, modernity, that aspect of our society, our socio-cultural situation, and how it has contributed to secularization. So we'll get to that in the next video. So I bid you good day for this one.